Queer joy is the delight you find in unexpected places. Joy where joy maybe isn't supposed to be. A joy that is also a revolution. Alexander Sakhyun Chee is my full name. I am 55 years old, turning 56 next month. I was born in South Kingstown, Rhode Island. I was a financial crisis because I was not planned. My father was in graduate school for oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. My mother was a school teacher, home economics, and then they needed money. So my father accepted an offer from his father to come back to Korea and to work in the family business, which was fisheries. And so he and my mom flew back to Seoul when I was 9 months old. Grandfather was initially against the marriage because my mom was American and white. But once he figured out that it meant that she could help him expand his business into America, she became something of a partner. And so they were moving around looking for different fisheries operations that they could set up, mostly for what's called skipjack tuna. I loved that part of my childhood a great deal. I loved swimming in the oceans off of those islands and swimming in the pools at the hotels on those islands. And I loved my kindergarten in Guam. It was a hardship to move to Maine. I remember the first thing someone said to me at school was, "Are you a chink?" And I didn't know what the word was. I was 6, and I hadn't really been prepared for that. And so when I got home, I told my mother about this interaction, and she was really alarmed. I think what was maybe hard was that for being their child, I was also not like either of them particularly, so they didn't really know what I was facing. It took me a long time to learn that not everyone was asked, "How did your parents meet?" which was the polite way of asking, "Why do you exist?" My father died when I was 15. I have an essay that I wrote. That's my first published personal essay where I write about how when I came out to my mother, I tried to think of what my father would think, what he would say, before I told her, because I didn't want her to ask me, "What would your father have thought?" and for me not to have an answer. She didn't ask, but I think it was useful for me to go through that process of coming out to him in my imagination. I was very lucky to have a father who was not interested in replicating what he saw as the patriarchal faults of his own father. And so he didn't try to control what I studied. He didn't try to control what I was interested in. Something that really struck me hard was when I was on a panel about Asian American masculine identity, and I was the only one who had a positive father role model. That made me very sad. But I think that also, it turns out, was rarer than I thought it should be. But I think to the extent that I felt like it factored in at all, ever, he just wanted me to have fun and have a great life.
Do you like flowers? Put some flowers in his pocket.
I moved to San Francisco in 1989 after I graduated college. And up until then, I had met exactly one other gay Asian man. And so this was the first time that I met not only other gay Asian men, but also the first time I met gay men who were mixed race Asian, like myself. So it felt a sort of rarefied kind of community, even though I remember some of them saying to me, you might have had a really different life if you'd grown up out here. So I was following community when I moved to San Francisco, a community that I had at Wesleyan University, where I went to college. Many of them were lesbians, a few gay men. It was a little startling or alienating in the sense that the community was big enough there that it could balkanize. It seemed almost a kind of an effort to have the sort of community attachments that I had previously. There were gay bars where women weren't welcome, for example. There had been, I didn't know about it until I moved there, but there had been a historic protest where Asian men had been discriminated against in gay bars in San Francisco and protested their exclusion and won access. But then that had turned into a culture that seemed to fetishize everyone around their ethnicity, and in which a biracial person was a sort of another kind of mistake, as it were, or oddity. So do you go to the bar where the white guys are there for Asian guys and vice versa? Or do you go to, where do you go if you don't go to that bar? What other bars are there? I was very lucky in that there was a queer punk scene happening at the time that was very welcoming of me and my friends, and so we just kind of spent our time mostly there and stayed away from what seemed like the old-fashioned gay bars that didn't make any sense to us. I think how I would describe it is, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s even, there was an idea that at some point we would become accepted enough to disappear, as it were, where there wouldn't be a need for quote-unquote labels to describe us. And instead, what we've seen is that we have found a community that wants more language for what we are. And in that language, we find possibility and not oppression. And I think that is a startling thing for that older generation to understand. And I guess as someone who's Gen X, I feel like I understand why what happened in a way that I'm not sure that older generation does. It's harder for that group to, I think, accept how this new generation is exploring itself. I have a niece, well, I guess the word now is nibbling. They came out as non-binary last year and also as demisexual. And I am really proud of them for finding themselves that way and for finding the community that they found so young in high school. I said to the nibbling, my nibbling, it's less lonely with you here. I know that there is a social death that can happen when you come out, where your family just moves away from you and treats you like you're not alive anymore. That as a result, a lot of Koreans stay closeted, marry, have relationships, and even families, but they're not out. I think because I suffered so much alienation from my father's family, especially after his death, I didn't mind what we would call the threat of social death for coming out. I was like, fine, lose another one if you must. And I think they eventually have respected that. I don't know if they've read my books, which are now available in Korean. I haven't been addressed about anything I've written, though. There was one uncle who's dead now who I came out to and gave him the novel specifically because he was the one I was closest to and who was closest to my father and who I trusted. And I remember him saying, "Don't you want one of these?" and pointing to a picture of my nieces and nephews and nibbling. I said, I can still have children if I want, but I don't know if I will. I was laughing afterwards though that I thought of it as a very like Korean exceptional child coming out where you're like, I'm gay and an author, you know, not just gay. It's easy to imagine that political work is only like demonstrations and policy work and mutual aid. It could be too easy to forget that part of it is like going out, dancing with friends, jumping on a stage for a favorite song, and just being goofy, you know, finding the space to just have that pleasure with each other. I think something that was tremendous for me as a grown person later in life was finding the bubble tea crowd, which has been such a source of pleasure and where I made so many new friends. The sorts of younger generations of artists that I've met also through that scene has been life-giving. So it's the kind of thing where if you try to say like, this means so much, it starts to almost crowd in on the delicacy of the joy that you're actually trying to nurture and protect. But I feel like my younger self, I don't know what advice I would have for him. I'm always aware of him judging me in a good way and responding it as a result. You know, I think that I didn't believe in a future back then. I didn't believe in this future that I have now. I didn't think I would have a husband or that I could be a full professor at Dartmouth and be out of the closet. Even with the difficulties that surround us now, those difficulties are coming because we are powerful and not because we are not. And because we've made something that shines really brightly. Just remember the pleasure is the guide. That's the advice.
1, 2. Nice. Yeah, face framed. Yes, circle. Yeah. Square. Triangle. Trapezoid. Trapezoid.